we'll get started, okay? I just want to address some things, kind of a flow of show. What's going to happen, they're going to come out. We're going to have the National Guard and some agents come out here, line up. Our governor and some VIPs are going to be out here with our chief. They're going to address, put some statements out, and the governor's going to answer some questions, take some questions, and just want to let you know if you could hold your questions to the end. Thank you. Anybody need a sound check? Everything working good? Testing, 1, 2, 1, 2. All right. If you want, I'll give you our public affairs number if you don't have it. So at the end, if you don't. Okay, just a few more minutes more. About at the 1 minute warning right now. Thank you, folks. We're going to go ahead and get started in just a minute.
Good afternoon. My name is Rudy Karras. I'm the Chief Patrol Agent of the Tucson sector. I'm glad is to see that all of you could come out today. I am going to introduce some very important guests that we have here in Nogales. One being a man who needs no introduction, but a huge supporter of the Border Patrol, CBP, and of course the state of Arizona out here, who understands the challenges that we have on the border. And that's Governor Ducey, who's with me today. Also have Major General Mike McGuire from the Arizona National Guard, General John Hofert, who's become a tremendous partner of ours as we've started to plan our operation down here on the border. I've got Colonel Frank Milstead with the Department of Public Safety. Also have the Mayor of Nogales, John Doyle. Representative from the Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Office, Raul Rodriguez, with us. But more importantly today, I wanted to thank the men and women in uniform who go out on a daily basis and protect this country. I have some opening statements before I actually turn it over to the governor. I think it's important for everybody here to understand today that border security is a national security issue. And I think the President has demonstrated his commitment to using every available tool and resource is to help us down here on the border. U.S. Customs and Border Protection has had a long relationship with the Guard in different areas, but specifically here in Arizona, we've had a long and lasting relationship. We initially have provided some requirements to the Arizona National Guard of some of the things that they can do here to help us, namely with aerial support, with some road maintenance projects, and helping us man some camera systems out here that will ultimately allow us is to get back into doing law enforcement work. I am also, as I reiterated earlier, I'm very proud of the work that not only the men in CBP do on a regular basis, but all of our law enforcement and military who provide assistance for us down here. So with that, I will turn it over to Governor Ducey. Governor, once again, thank you very much for coming down today.
Thank you very much, Chief Karras, for the introduction. I'm very happy to be back here in Nogales today. A governor has no higher priority than public safety, protecting a state and its citizens. The people of Arizona have been calling on the federal government to secure this border for many years. With efforts like our Border Strike Force, we've been able to combat the illegal flow of drugs, human trafficking, and weapons into Arizona. And I'm grateful today to have a federal administration that is finally taking action to secure the border for the safety of all Americans. Some of the guardsmen and women that you see here today, along with personnel from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and other federal agencies, have been working in partnership with our local sheriffs and police chiefs to keep our communities and our nation safe along our southern border. With Operation Guardian Shield underway, more members of the Arizona National Guard have joined them to provide a much-needed support for these ongoing security efforts. I have no doubt they will be an asset to the operations taking place here. I receive regular updates on border activity, but with the recent surge that we've seen, I wanted to come down to the front line in Nogales and see it for myself. I want to hear from the experts and see our border security operation in action. I want to express my thanks and gratitude, along with my support, once again to everyone at every level for the work that you do to keep us safe. We're truly grateful for your service. Thank you.
What kind of questions do you have?
There is some question that a lot of this is more show than go, that the real need is with the agents who are doing the customs work at the border. That's where the real need is. Will any of the National Guard be actually working with customs officials?
This should not be a surprise to anyone. This has been an issue in Arizona for the past decade. We had to put together a border strike force that is led by Colonel Milstead because there was no attention being paid to what was happening on our southern border with drugs and human trafficking. With the recent surge that we've seen, not only month over month in the last 60 days, but a 200% surge year over year, for this administration to call up the National Guard or call on the governors to call up the National Guard to work with Customs and Border Patrol is much needed. So
But are they going to be working with customs agents at
they are going to be working with Customs and Border Patrol at the border. And we're going to leave it to the law enforcement experts as to where they should best be deployed. But the National Guard is here in a support position, and I'm going to turn it over to the chief to talk about where he is going to deploy to stop the illegal flow of migration and drugs.
And Nancy, just to answer your question, what we're going to have is we're developing a plan, a phased approach, but at some point in time, they are going to see support at the ports of entry as well, if that's what you're asking, because we also have to ensure is that we can still inspect a lot of the cargo that's coming into the United States. Of vital importance to our communities is lawful trade and travel. So we can always also use the Guard is to support us, not only between the ports of entry, but at the ports of entry, is to make sure is that we can properly screen the commerce that's coming into the United States.
But Chief, when we talk to law enforcement officials down here, and we talk to the business community, that is the place where everybody says they need resources. And we have National Guards and troops here, but it doesn't sound like any of them are going where the experts here say we need them.
They are going there, I assure you that. As I indicated, we are working into a phased approach on this. We're looking initially at some resources between the ports of entry, but we are also going to bring some of those resources that we are requesting through the governor and the National Guard is to support the ports of entry as well.
I'll come here. I'm going to come here, and then I'll come over there.
Governor, because it's urgent, why call up the Guard on your own authority before now? If budget's an issue, why not request a Title 32?
We received a phone call from Secretary Kirsten Nielsen before the numbers were even released, informing the border governors, myself, Governor Jerry Brown, Governor Susana Martinez, and Governor Greg Abbott, of the surge in activity at the border. Of course, we're aware of it as well. They informed us that the Department of Defense would put the order forward. The funding would be available through Title 32, so it doesn't affect Arizona's general fund, but the funds flow from the federal government.
Did you ever consider an activation even before that request was
Well, what we've done in Arizona is the border strike force, and we've done that over the last 3 years of this administration. We're working with the county sheriffs, local law enforcement, and now we finally have the Border Patrol as a partner in this operation.
I hear that there's a spike at the border. What is it over to the Tucson sector? I haven't heard of a spike in the Tucson or Yuma sector.
Well, these are national news reports. It's a 200% surge year over year, March 2017 to 2018, and the 37% increase from February to March.
I'm asking about specifically Tucson sector or Yuma sector because I don't know if that includes real.
Well, I'm the governor of the state of Arizona. I'm giving you the total numbers for the state of Arizona. Do you want to?
So we have seen spikes throughout the southwest border. I think March was one of the increases that we saw a tremendous number of apprehensions go up. Here and in other places, I know Yuma was up 46% in their traffic. So we are seeing spikes in traffic all along the southwest border. The Rio Grande Valley down in South Texas is probably the highest, but Tucson sector is a close second in the apprehensions. I don't have the exact numbers for you right now, but I'll definitely have my public affairs folks provide that to you.
Governor Ducey, hi, I'm Ariel from Nogales International. As people mentioned, the economy is a big concern here for Nogales and Santa Cruz County. Couldn't this be seen as couldn't this make it actually worse when people may feel that it's unsafe to come here? Why are you sending it here specifically to make people feel like it's unsafe to visit as tourists, like it turn off traders? That it's something they should care about. How do you reconcile the concern for improving the economy with the local impact of how much tourism and trade?
Well, our economy is growing in Arizona. The last time our unemployment rate was this low in the state of Arizona, people were renting their movies from Blockbuster. So it's safe here in our state. Our economy's growing. People are moving to the state. Over 200,000 folks have moved here over the last 3 years. But we also want to protect the public. And border security is public safety. And we want to stop the drugs and the human trafficking that's happening coming across the border. So we're working with the Border Strike Force. We're working with the National Guard and the Border Patrol to do that.
But why send it to Nogales? Nogales, the economy is not good. People are moving. So why send it here? Where, I mean, why not?
Well, listen, we have to.
Headlines and national headlines that would say National Guard to Nogales.
The National Guard is going to the southern Arizona border. A governor has to balance the responsibility of growing economy with public safety, and public safety is going to come first.
But Governor, are you worried about the optics that you believe that the situation is so dire that you're mobilizing the military?
I think every Arizonan and every American realizes what has been happening on our southern border. We're just focused on border security here. So the optics of it are you have a government, both a federal government in Washington, D.C., and a state government that's working together and acting to partner and to protect its citizens.
Governor, coming out of Sonora, word is that the business and the government community there are not very happy with you right now. They feel like they've been kind of taken by surprise. Have you had a direct conversation with Governor Pavlovich?
I have a wonderful relationship with Governor Pavlovich and her team. My team was with her team yesterday, and the briefings on the situation and an understanding of the operation. I haven't talked to her on this specific issue, but I talk to her all the time. I see her every few months, and we have a very close relationship. We have a friendship.
One more, guys, one more.
Following the deployments in 2005 and 2010, the GLA released a report where the Department of Defense said that it was very concerned about, this is the Department of Defense, very concerned about creating the perception of militarization of the border. That is what these people are, is militarization of the border. Is that not concerning?
There is no militarization of the border. The National Guard is here in support of the Border Patrol, and it is the Border Patrol that is in the law enforcement position. And I'm going to let the leader of the Border Patrol talk a little bit more about that. Chief?
I think it's important for everybody to realize We do have drugs. We are facing an opioid epidemic, as the president has talked about. We do have weapons smuggling that occurs on this border. We do have illicit cash that goes across this border. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to do everything we can is to protect the communities we serve. The military support that we're going to get here is going to allow us is to free up some agents, is to return to those vital duties. And I think that this is all a combined effort that we can show the people in Arizona and in other states is that we can work together on a problem that we have out here. So I know it's something that people are thinking that why are we doing this now? This is something that's happened under previous administrations, both with the Bush administration and also the Obama. So I mean, I think it's important sometimes for us is to see is that there is a need for us is to get support. There is no one agency, whether it's here in Arizona or in other parts of the country, that has enough resources is to tackle the problem, especially with the amount of money that a lot of the cartels have in operating down here.
Chief, wasn't this triggered by the president's doing this caravan of people coming through and going to smash into our border? Isn't that what triggered the concern and triggered the National Guard?
Nancy, I think that this has been a topic that we've been looking at for some time. We've had numerous caravans that have come to our borders in the past. That is where, of course, we have the mission is to intercept that. That is not what we're asking the Guard to do. We're asking them to help us in certain areas so that it will give us the resources is to apply to the border. Make no mistake about this, immigration work is a responsibility of CBP and the other agencies within DHS. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. If again, I gave you a contact number for our shop, for our public affairs shop. If you have further questions, please reach out to them, and they should be able to answer your questions for you and provide those stats. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chief, quick question. Where are the guardsmen staying?
That you're going to have to ask them.
Okay, that's what I'm
The soldiers actually going to be out deployed, you know?
I don't have those answers. Like I said, contact our 3210 number.
How many exactly will we get for, you know, about 60?
I don't have the number. I'm sorry.
You don't have the number?
No,
Who
I
is
don't
the
have
contact
any
for the guards that, for questions about?
I don't have his information, but I'll definitely get it to you.
Or can you provide us the numbers for exactly how many will be deployed? Because there's been reports that it is 60.
Yeah, I don't have those numbers with me.
Can I contact them?
You can contact our
Their
office.
phone number, they can help me with these questions?
They should.
All right, everybody, here on Fox10Phoenix.com. We are looking at a commercial fire here right now in Phoenix area. We'll be back here with more news now in just a moment. And folks, this is at 19th Avenue in Dare Valley. All right, folks, next here on News Now, we're going to take you out to Tampa Bay, Florida, where we're getting an update where a murder suspect was killed. Let's get the update from police there.
For the record, I'm Sergeant Mike Lynch, Lynch, with Pinellas Park Police. I'm Public Information Officer for the agency. Before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and read some statements that we have about the investigation itself. Hopefully I'll answer most of your questions, and then we'll follow up with any questions that you might have after that. Obviously, you all are aware of what happened earlier this morning or late last night up in Pennsylvania that brought us to this point. We'd like to kind of discuss now what brought us or led us all to this conclusion today. So, as you recall, back on February 12th, just before 10 o'clock p.m., Pinellas Park Police began investigating a homicide. The victim of Miss Morton Hicks at that time in the 5100 block of 78th Avenue here in Pinellas Park. At that time, investigators started putting together a timeline and also looking into Miss Morton Hicks' background. As you have to understand that when we work these cases, we have to begin to understand what the life of that individual is. We have to find out who their friends are, who their contacts are, and kind of what they're all about, and that's what detectives began doing. So during this investigation, just prior to Miss Morton Hicks attending her orchestra practice, detectives learned that she received a single phone call that evening from the suspect in this case, who was Mr. Sadiq Mashouk, also known as Stephen Brooks. We know this because we have Mr. Brooks' cell phone information and obviously the victim's information. So they were able to identify a single phone call to the victim that night just prior to her attending the orchestra practice. Following her orchestra practice, the victim, Miss Morton Hicks, left approximately 8:45 p.m. that night from the Performing Arts Center. We do know that she left the general area of the Performing Arts Center, but she did not leave the area surrounding the City Hall Performing Arts Center parking lot. She remained within that area. Between 8:45 and 9:52 p.m. is when the shooting took place. We had previously mentioned that there was approximately 50 minutes to an hour gap in time where we did not know where Miss Morton Hicks had gone to. Through the investigation, detectives were able to determine that Miss Morton Hicks was in her vehicle with who we believe to be Mr. Brooks at that time, and that they were driving around the north end of the city of Pinellas Park. We also were able to identify her vehicle as a kind of unique vehicle that had some kayak racks on the top of it. Through surveillance videos that were obtained through multiple businesses, detectives were able to track the movement of that vehicle. At one point during that evening, the vehicle sat for approximately 25 minutes in the area of 126th Avenue and 44th Street. I cannot tell you what was happening in that car. We don't have any video that shows anything happening in that car. We just know her vehicle traveled to that location. It sat for 25 minutes, and then it left. Following that stint in that area, the vehicle was tracked directly back to the parking lot of City Hall, pretty much where she began this journey from. It was at that time we had two witnesses that were in an adjacent parking lot that saw and heard Miss Morton Hicks run from the vehicle and seen being chased into the street where she was ultimately shot and killed. Those were the original witnesses that we had previously mentioned that saw the shooting. Following this, the suspect in the case got into Miss Morton Hicks's vehicle and drove it from the scene approximately a half a mile away and left the vehicle behind what is known as Park Plaza here in the city. At that time, the suspect attempted to set the car on fire, but failed to do so. The fire snuffed itself out, due to a lack of oxygen. So detectives were able to recover the vehicle, obviously recover inside the vehicle, more importantly, Miss Morton Hicks' cell phone, which obviously leads us to cell phone records and things like that we're able to work with, in addition to other evidence that was left in the vehicle. Following the vehicle being dumped at that site, Detectives were able to obtain multiple surveillance videos of the subject who left the vehicle at the plaza, at the Park Plaza, and followed that subject through various videos throughout Park Plaza, back up to the area of 78th Avenue and 49th Street, not too far from where the shooting took place. From that point, the suspect drops off of any surveillance videos, and we don't know where he went from that point. We just know that he ended back up at that location. Throughout this time, investigators received information from the victim's friends about a connection between her and Mr. Brooks, having been, as some of you know already, a tenant of Miss Morton Hicks. Miss Morton Hicks owned several rental properties here in Pinellas County. She rented one of those properties to the suspect in this case. Through interviews with friends of Miss Morton Hicks and family, they were able to determine that the suspect was behind in rent extensively. He had been working for the victim as a handyman at her various rental properties, where he was attempting to work off the rent that he was behind in. At some point during his employment with Miss Morton Hicks, she became unhappy with the work that he was doing, and she lowered the amount of money that she was paying to him. Through interviews that the detectives had conducted, he was not happy about this information, and of course this led Miss Morton Hicks to begin the eviction process against our suspect in this case. That information was filed, and as some of you know, you have seen some of that previously. Investigators were also able to speak with all of the other tenants of Miss Morton Hicks during the investigation. The one person that they did not speak to in this case was Mr. Brooks. He was not able to be found or located anywhere in the area during the time of the investigation initially. During the investigation, it was also determined that the victim did sustain some physical injuries prior to being shot. The crime scene of both the vehicle and Miss Morton Hicks was processed, and during this process, DNA evidence was obtained and submitted to the lab. During that time period, DNA results were obtained and positively identified Mr. Brooks as the owner or the responsible party for that particular DNA. His DNA was already on file in the CODIS database, which is the national database where prior convicted felons' DNA is on file. Once that DNA evidence was obtained on March 28th, detectives were able to obtain an arrest warrant here in Pinellas County. Following the information obtained from the arrest warrant, investigators were able, through investigative techniques, identify that the suspect, Mr. Brooks, had fled the day following the homicide to the Harvest area of Alabama, which we have seen over the last couple of days. That information was passed along to investigators with the U.S. Marshal Service and the local law enforcement agencies in Alabama once the arrest warrant was obtained. At that point, those parties began their investigation into attempting to locate and also apprehend Mr. Brooks at that time. From that point forward, the Alabama authorities were able to obviously locate him, and we know over the last couple of days what transpired up there. As confirmed today by the Pennsylvania State Police, Troop B out of Washington County, Pennsylvania, the suspect in the case was shot and killed during a vehicle pursuit that happened overnight last night. The Pinellas Park Police Department would wish to thank all the law enforcement agencies involved in the investigations, include the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office Forensics Unit, Pinellas County State Attorney's Office, and all the attorneys investigators from the Pinellas Pasco State Attorney's Office that were involved in this case, to include also the U.S. Marshal Service, Madison County SO, and also the Pennsylvania State Police for their professionalism and dedication to finding and locating the killer of Mrs. Morton Hicks. I also want to recognize the hard work done by the men and women of the Pinellas Park Police Department and their tireless dedication to investigating this case. We also wish to thank the community of Pinellas Park and the local media for their patience while detectives thoroughly and professionally investigate this case. It is important to remember that a homicide investigation is conducted not only to bring the responsible party in front of our justice system, but also to represent and speak on behalf of the victim and the victim's family who can no longer speak. We have been in contact with the victim's family, and they have asked for privacy during this time as they are reflecting on what has transpired.
This is a Fox 10 News Alert.
And welcome back here to News Now. We are back out live here with this commercial fire happening right now in Phoenix. As you can see, we have ground shots now available, all courtesy thanks to our very own Rick Davis there live at the scene. Rick, what can you tell us here at this moment?
Well, I tell you what, Mike, Phoenix Fire is pretty busy trying to get this recycle plant fire under control. It looks like they're just trying to lay another water line. I'll zoom in over here to get some more water on this fire. Nothing like yesterday. This fire here, yesterday was a transmission fire. This is a recycle plant fire. I'm assuming that all that's burning is paper. So that's a good thing, but still we're dealing with the wind. They bumped it up to first alarm. They've got units all around Adobe. Adobe is just a couple blocks north of Deer Valley Road off of 23rd Avenue. And they're fighting it. They're trying to get it under control, but obviously when you have a bunch of paper and stuff like that burning, it will take a while to extinguish this.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's right. A lot of fuel right there, no doubt. But wow, you're right. What a difference then from yesterday's fire that we featured here, as well as today's fire, right?
Yes. Phoenix Fire, again, they know all the different scenarios for these types of fires that they come up against. And like I said, they're getting here. He's getting ready to turn on the water right now, Mike. He's starting to apply more pressure to the truck, and there it goes. So not only do they have water coming in, blowing in from the north, but now they'll have it coming in from the west too.
And how many lines would you say that are down right now that the fire department has going right here?
It's hard to tell. I mean, they have resources inside the facility, the plant itself, and with this truck here, I'm not sure which ladder it is, but this is on the west side of 22nd Avenue and Adobe, and they're about to start shooting water in from the west. And then if I go over here to the east, they're on the other side of this property where you see they have lines going in that way too. So at least 4 or 5 active lines that we know of.
All right, well, there we go. Rick Davis there live at the scene here for us once again on the News Now, covering this fire. And thank you for this update there, Rick.
Okay.
All right, and everybody, and we will go back here to that Florida murder suspect
transpired over the last 48 hours and the closure that's being brought to the case. So at this point, I'll open up for questions that I can try to answer for you.
How are you certainly sure that this was Brooks in Alabama? We asked this yesterday. When we spoke with police a couple months ago, there was no clear answer. So how are detectives able to know that this was 100% him in Harvest, Alabama?
Mm-hmm. So in using his cell phone records, we are able to track him to that particular area of Alabama. We also know that his girlfriend had family there, and that is the house that he ended up in. So the house that he was held up in originally belonged to the girlfriend's family.
So the people he took hostage in Alabama, were that his girlfriend's family?
Yeah, so let me clarify that a little bit. I know the local media up there reported they were hostages. They were an elderly couple that was in the house. They were, from what I understand, the parents of the girlfriend. In talking to the law enforcement agencies up there, I understand that they were allowed to leave on their own from the house. So while they were in the home, while he barricaded himself and refused to come out, they were allowed to freely leave the house when they chose to do so. But they were related to his girlfriend.
Is this a current girlfriend or an estranged girlfriend?
This was somebody that I understand that he was currently involved with.
And that DNA evidence, can you go back again? Where did you find it?
So the DNA was obtained during the processing of both from the victim herself and also from, obviously, the vehicle that we recovered as well.
And any idea, I mean, it might just be speculation, but what was going on in the car? Was she taken at gunpoint in the car, do you suspect?
Yeah, and that's completely speculation because we have no video, we have no witnesses that saw what was happening in that car. So what we're trying to put together, obviously, in our timeline is that she did receive that phone call from the suspect prior to her orchestra practice. We believe that she remained at the area of that waiting for him to show up, possibly to maybe receive payment or to discuss potentially what was going on between them, this dispute that had been going on. So from that point forward, we don't know what happened in that vehicle. The only thing we do know is the two of them ended up in that vehicle, driving around, like I said, for approximately 50 minutes or so before returning back to the location of where this started. So I can't even speculate as to what was the thought of even coming back to the original location. One theory or one thought might be that she might have been threatening at that point to notify police of their confrontation or something along those lines and fled the vehicle, and now he took the action that he did by shooting her. Again, completely speculation. Obviously, we don't have him to speak with, nor her, unfortunately.
What were those other injuries?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
What were those other injuries before the shooting?
So during the autopsy, they were able to determine that it looked like she had received some injuries consistent with a struggle. You know, she had some bruising about the face and whatnot. So again, speculation is something was happening in that vehicle that, may have led to those injuries, obviously.
Was she sexually assaulted?
Yeah, so from the investigation, we were not able to determine at all that she was sexually assaulted, so there was no indication of that whatsoever.
But witnesses, I know that it's not clear exactly why she ran out of the car, but what did witnesses say, again, a description of what she was acting like as she got out of the car?
So you can only imagine these two individuals that were in an adjacent parking lot. They were working on a vehicle that was having some vehicle trouble. They look up and they hear this woman panicked, screaming, running through the parking lot, getting away from an individual. That's what they see. They see her running, actually running towards them, and she actually reversed course and started heading back towards 78th Avenue away from this individual. This individual initially began to chase her, returned to the vehicle, and then began chasing her towards 78th Avenue, where she was ultimately shot. They don't even recall that individual running to the car. They just remember the car. Then after that, tearing out of the parking lot, and ultimately, like I said, it was driven no more than half a block away from where we discovered it at. I'll have to get back to you. I don't remember off the top of my head. I apologize.
Alabama authorities kept saying yesterday he was wanted out of Florida for 2 murders. And I know yesterday you couldn't really talk about that because it was still ongoing, but we're still scratching our heads.
Yeah, I don't know where that came from because the only warrant that existed was ours, and it was for only 1 homicide. So I don't know where that came from or how that confusion came about. I did speak to their PIO up there yesterday. I don't know where that came about, but when I did hear that, I did speak to him and say, hey, listen, we only have 1, so I don't know where the second one came from.
Was it perhaps his record that serving time?
Yeah, listen, he has a very lengthy, violent criminal history, and one of those charges, over 20 years ago was a third-degree felony murder charge. So
where was that out of?
It was out of St. Petersburg.
Sir, who's driving the car?
We don't know, and that's one of those things that's an unknown for us. None of the video that we have show the driver or passenger in that case. All we have is the vehicle's movement, and that is consistent also with the phone records that we were able to obtain of the victims as well. It also shows the same movement of the vehicle.
And how did he get there?
We don't know. So that last video image that we have of a individual, and let me clarify too, we have no video that shows his face to say, oh yeah, that's him. We know only through his physical evidence that was left behind, also his cell phone records, that he was at that location. What we have to determine is that, or his communication with her, I should say. We have to remember that none of these videos show his face. But that last image of the individual moving up towards 49th Street and 78th Avenue, we don't know where he went from there. He certainly could have continued to a location where he had a vehicle parked or something along those lines. I don't know. Could have hopped on the bus for all we know.
Any idea of how much money he was in debt?
No, I don't know what the amount that was owed. I know it was a hefty amount that he was behind in. But again, he was attempting to work it off by being employed by her. From again talking to friends and family, she wasn't happy with the work that was being performed, and she actually reduced the amount of money she was paying him. So you can imagine the struggle then to overcome the amount you owed is now even greater than what you were obviously originally trying to do. And then beyond that, she ended up filing for eviction, where the initial notice was provided to him, the 3 to 4 day notice telling him that, hey, the eviction's coming. So
when was that filed?
That was just prior to her death. I don't have the date for you, but I can get it for you if you need it.
With having his cell phone records, do you know why he would have been up in the Pittsburgh area, up in Pennsylvania?
No, and we were asked that this morning by the Pennsylvania authorities. I'm not aware of any friends or family that he had. I can't say that he doesn't have a friend or somebody that lives up there, but I have no idea why he would have been heading that way.
I mean, it's just speculation. Could he have been trying to flee the country? You don't know.
Your guess is as good as mine right now. I'm glad that none of the officers up there were injured, and certainly nobody else, in his wake of crime. Basically.
Can you say a little bit more about the car chase and how he was? Did he run? Did he crash, run, and then they fired?
Yeah, only from what I've spoke to about the Pennsylvania authorities and saw, again, their press briefing this morning, I understand that he was actually being pursued the wrong way on the interstate up there, ultimately crashed again for the second time in a couple of days, fled that vehicle, and more importantly, he ended up pulling a firearm on these officers and pointing it at them, and ultimately they took the appropriate action. We'll be interested in that firearm as well. We've already spoke with them about that. At some point, we'll be looking to obtain that firearm, so our investigation continue to look into the ballistics part of that to try to match the gun to our case here as well.
So when they started the chase, they didn't even know it was him.
This is a Fox 10 News Alert.
All right, everybody, we are taking you now back out live to this fire that's happening there in Phoenix. So we continue to take a look here. You are watching News Now with our photojournalist Rick Davis there live at the scene. Rick, what can you tell us now here?
Yeah, Mike, they're still working this fire, and they're trying to contain all the recycling stuff that's in there burning. What I can tell you is that the Phoenix Fire Department PIO, Captain Rob McDade, just arrived on scene. He motioned to me that he's going to go over and talk to firefighters and come back with some official information. One thing I can show you is that they were able to get that ladder, the water to that ladder truck, and now they're up high applying as much force of water to that fire as they can.
Okay, so we'll just stay on this shot right here, Rick, and we'll wait for that PIO to come back and maybe give some updates here.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure how long it'll be, but I've in eyesight contact with him. He's working as hard as he can to give us some information. I can tell you that this, from what I'm understanding, it's all paper in there, so probably won't be hearing any loud booms like yesterday. And again, they've got this contained to this one area, not expecting the wind to be as big a factor as yesterday, but they are concerned. Arizona Public Service has crews out here on standby, watching the power lines and so forth, so they're ready for whatever.
All right, and what we'll do is we'll just monitor it, and when we see if we see somebody jump in front of the camera, we'll go back to it and take it live here with you, Rick,
yeah.
Okay?
Actually, Rob, if you want, he's walking over right now. I'm gonna switch up my audio here real quick.
Yep.
You'll hear a little pop in the audio, but it's not going anywhere. Rob is walking to me as we speak, and he's gonna quick update as to Captain Rob McDade here. What do we have going on here with this fire?
We've got a waste management paper products plant behind us right here, and we've got cardboard boxes and paper material stacked all the way to the building. So right now we've got active fire in there. The problem is getting the reach into there. The paper products are protecting the other areas of the building that are on fire right now. So we're trying to get penetrating nozzles from our elevated ladder pipes into that building. We're trying to work with Waste Management to see if we can safely and effectively get front loader tractors to start pulling away some of those paper products. We need to get water on the fire. It's causing us a problem right now. We do have high winds. Luckily, it's not like it was yesterday, but we're dealing with the high winds and we're dealing with an extraordinary amount of paper products stacked tightly that are on fire right now.
I noticed that Arizona Public Service is out here too.
Absolutely. We've got overhead power lines, always a concern for us. We want to make sure as we have firefighters working underneath them and we have ladder pipes in that area that one, they're not affected by the power, and two, that they don't come down on that building causing even more. So working with them to de-energize any of the power poles that are above that building at this time.
Okay, Mike, you got it right there. Captain Rock McDay, he's giving us the latest on this recycle plant fire. I'm sure there'll be more to come as they continue to fight it and figure out the best way to contain it.
All right, there. Thank you so much there, Rick Davis there, live on the scene once again here for us on the News Now. Thanks again, Rick, for that update.
Nice job.
All right, folks, and we'll take you now out to another fire that continues to rage on, really a wildfire situation out there in Oklahoma. We're taking these live aerials right now of more than 120,000 square feet continuing to burn here. 120,000 acres going. All right, folks, so this chopper is leaving. We'll try to get you more updates here with this fire. Does not look good, though. Take you out to the State Department briefing that happened about an hour ago. Heather Nauer.
Try not to do these on Friday afternoons too often, so bear with us. Given Director,
especially on such a nice Friday.
I know, it's a beautiful Friday. Okay, so let's get started. First, I'd like to bring you some news out of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Today, the United States is pleased to announce nearly $67 million in additional humanitarian assistance for the people of the Democratic Republic of Congo. The new assistance is providing urgent food, shelter, health care, and other urgent aid for vulnerable Congolese and refugees in the DRC. The funding is also supporting the humanitarian response for Congolese refugees in the region. Intensifying conflicts have left more than 13 million people in need of urgent humanitarian aid, many of whom are facing acute food insecurity. The United States is the largest single donor supporting this humanitarian response. With the new announcement, we are providing nearly $277 million since fiscal year 2017 in critical assistance to the people in need in the DRC and for Congolese refugees in the region. We urge more donors to provide resources now to help those suffering in the midst of these terrible conflicts and the government of the DRC to take steps to address the underlying causes of insecurity that have given rise to the displacement and conflict that have fueled the humanitarian crisis. We welcome the pledges from other donors at the conference that took place in Geneva today, which total approximately $500 million. To put that success in perspective, the amount raised from one conference today is on par with the entire amount raised in 2017. 8 countries more than doubled their support, and major pledges came in from the United States, the EU, the United Kingdom, Belgium, Sweden, and Canada. So we thank those countries for their assistance. Next, I know many of you are interested in the Global Engagement Center, so I wanted to bring you an update on that. I'm pleased to offer an update on the Global Engagement Center, specifically on a funding opportunity that we launched several weeks ago to solicit proposals to counter state-sponsored disinformation. This program is called the Information Access Fund. The notice of funding opportunity closed on Wednesday night, and we received approximately 150 proposals from around the world. The response shows the active interest that civil society groups have to play a role in countering foreign disinformation. The GEC will now begin its review of the proposals for technical merit. We intend to move quickly to support the top proposals after the anticipated transfer of funds from the Department of Defense is completed. For organizations that missed the deadline but are interested in working with the GEC, they have another opportunity to apply for funding opportunities posted on grants.gov, and that doesn't close until April the 23rd. So we'll keep you posted with any updates on that. Lastly, pardon me. Acting Secretary John Sullivan is in Lima, Peru today for the 8th Summit of the Americas. Yesterday, he met with members of Venezuelan independent civil society and acknowledged their efforts to document and raise awareness about repression in Venezuela. He also met with members of the Cuban independent civil society and recognized their work to promote a more open, free, and prosperous future for their country. Additionally, the acting secretary joined Secretary of Commerce Ross's meeting with the Brazilian foreign minister. The leaders discussed our joint economic growth agenda, security cooperation, and global issues. Today, the acting secretary met with the Haitian president and thanked him for his leadership as chairman of the Caribbean community and urged consensus to promote and defend democracy in the region. The acting secretary, together with Mexican Foreign Secretary Vidaguerre, co-hosted a meeting with leaders from El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. They discussed ways to enhance the cooperation on security and also prosperity in the region. Tomorrow, the acting secretary will meet with the heads of the delegation of the governments of the Bahamas, Barbados, Guyana, Jamaica, St. Lucia. They will underscore the commitment to increasing engagement of the Caribbean partners as envisioned in the Caribbean 2020 strategy. International gatherings such as the Summit of the Americas are a great opportunity to bring people together to discuss shared interests, challenges, and opportunities. Women's economic empowerment is vital for our shared economic prosperity and global stability, which is why it's specifically identified as a priority action in the President's national security strategy. Over the past year, the administration has launched several new initiatives to expand opportunities for women, both domestically and globally. Today, Acting Secretary Sullivan, advisor to the President Ivanka Trump, and President and CEO of OPIC, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, Ray Washburn, launched 2X Americas. It uses a new U.S. government initiative which will commit $150 million mobilizing a total of $500 million to provide women in Latin America with access to capital, jobs, and opportunities to innovate and prosper. This further demonstrates the administration's commitment to women's economic empowerment globally. When women rise, it's good for their families, their communities, and their businesses. Lastly, on a related note, later today, Vice President Pence will arrive in Lima, and he'll make an important humanitarian assistance announcement at the Summit of the Americas alongside USAID Administrator Mark Green and the acting Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere, Paco Palmieri. So we hope you will stay tuned for that announcement coming out from them later today. And with that, I'd be happy to take your questions.
Thanks, Heather. Before I get to Syria, I have three extremely brief ones on your top, one on each of your top, these announcements. Okay. One, as you noted, this conference for Dr. Congo
yes.
was in Geneva, not in Kinshasa.
Yes, it was in Geneva.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Well, one of the reasons for that is Congo actually boycotted this meeting.
Yes, we're certainly aware of that, and that was a real disappointment.
Because, okay, do you have anything more to say? I mean, they say that the crisis is overblown and that the need is not that big.
Well, I think if you look at all the money that was raised at that conference, there certainly is a need, and that it's not overblown.
Okay. Secondly, on the GEC proposals, these are 100 from 150 different companies, or
various proposals, 150 proposals from countries around the world.
From countries?
Well,
or
not
companies?
from governments themselves, but from individuals, NGOs, things of that nature.
And okay, so like. I don't want
so someone may have an idea, an organization somewhere in the world may have an idea about how we can best handle or best combat state-sponsored disinformation. And so they will submit their proposals, and we'll take a look at them and find the ones that have the best merit and look at engaging with them.
You don't happen to know if, like, Cambridge Analytica was one of the...
I'm not aware of that,
Okay,
no.
And then last one, on Sullivan's meetings, this thing that you mentioned with the Ivanka Trump, the 2X thing, this is XX like chromosomes?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure where the name came from. It's some sort of clever name that somebody came up with. I don't know the answer to that.
Before you go to Congo, before you go to Syria, can I follow up on Congo?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
So just on the Congo thing, the government says that the West is exaggerating it, and what is your...
Well, it's not just the West that was a participant in the Geneva meeting. I think I answered that with Matt's question. There were many other countries involved that all pulled together to raise some money and additional awareness for the crisis there. So when you have refugees and others leaving their country for other places, when you have people who are forced out of their homes, that's clearly a crisis.
And then the money that is raised, how what has the U.S. said about that money, where it has to go? Well, and surely you would not want any of it to go through the budget of the government.
We don't do that. When we provide humanitarian assistance as a course of matter, that assistance does not go to a government. This is the same way it works all across the world in different crises across the world. We provide that money to NGOs and different groups. It never goes into government coffers.
Sometimes it does, because if you want to stabilize a government that you could support. But
I'm talking about humanitarian aid. Okay.
So, and then on the other thing, on the U.S. has been pushing for an election in Congo. Does this emphasize the need for one?
I'm not aware of that. This is specifically about humanitarian aid.
So on Syria, I'm sure you have seen the rather, surprising assertion by the Russians that this suspected, presumed apparent chemical weapons attacking in Duma was facilitated by the British. What?
I saw that. I think this is one of a long list of instances in which Russia takes information and they try to turn it upside down. We've seen a long history of the Russian government sow discord, whether it's in our own election process, other countries. We see it through state-sponsored disinformation campaigns. We see what happened today at the UN Security Council, where they try to completely change the story when the facts become just a little too inconvenient for them. They try to change the story, but the facts are exactly what they are. Russia has changed its story once again because it's simply become, the facts have become too inconvenient for them.
But can you say, can you just come and flat out say that you have evidence that it was the Syrian government that was behind this and that Britain had nothing to do with it? Is that something that you...
The UK, I'm confident in saying, had absolutely nothing to do with it. It is the assessment of the U.S. government, the British government, the French government. I cannot speak on their behalf, but we've all been having conversations and sharing information, intelligence included, and we can say that the Syrian government was behind this attack. We talked about this the other day. The White House has addressed this as well.
What is the assessment?
Hey, thanks. Hi, Michelle.
So I think it was on Tuesday when we last had a briefing, right?
Yes.
Okay, so it was on Tuesday when you said, when you were asked about the OPCW and is the administration or should the administration wait to get those findings? And you emphasized the fact that there's already intel that chemical weapons were used. So what can you say on the state of that? Has the State Department's knowledge of what this was or that it was chemical weapons increased since 2 days ago? How would you say the level of proof has changed?
Well, let me start by addressing the OPCW. My understanding is that the OPCW arrived, it was either yesterday or today, tomorrow, pardon me, tomorrow in Syria to try to collect some information. So they are simply the body, the OPCW, the one that collects some of the information and determines the exact substance that was used. On Tuesday, when we last met, I talked about how we know that this was a chemical weapon that was used in Syria. The exact kind or the mix that we are still looking into. There are some television shows out there in the United States that have started to ask, well, why aren't we releasing all of this intelligence information right now? A lot of this stuff is classified at this point, so those things we're going to hold pretty close to the vest.
Well, would you, based on the words that you said on Tuesday, would you say that that's when the U.S. knew that this was Syria? I mean, would you say that there was proof on Tuesday?
I'm not going to I'm not going to say which day we absolutely knew that there was proof. The attack took place on Saturday. We know for a fact that it was a chemical weapon. We know that there are only certain countries like Syria that have delivery mechanisms and have those types of weapons.
Okay, well, would you say today, though, that the U.S. has proof that this was the Syrian regime?
Yes. Okay. And we continue to look at the information. We continue to gather information and further assess it. We don't have the information to be able to provide. We aren't able to provide all of this publicly at this point because it's sensitive.
So are we waiting for the OPCW then to?
We had said before, and this has been the position of the U.S. government. Sarah Sanders has said this as well, as has the president and others, that we believe we know who is responsible for this. We believe we know that chemical weapon was used. We will still wait for the OPCW, the OPCW will still formulate its facts and its findings, but that still does not determine, the OPCW does still not determine the responsibility. They just determine the substance.
But there won't be any action taken?
We covered this on Tuesday extensively. No, we did. We can go back to the thing.
Follow-up.
Okay, go ahead.
Even the Secretary of Defense was not conclusive in pointing the finger at the Syrian regime.
I can tell you this. Syria is responsible. We are all in agreement. I have also seen the Secretary of Defense's remarks as well. We are assessing various sources. Different government agencies and departments have different types of sources by which we gather information. So DOD has certain kinds of sources, State Department has different kinds of sources, and other agencies and departments have various sources. We will take a look at all of this information as it comes in, and we have to remind you that this is a dynamic situation and it's ongoing, but we're continuing to look into everything. Okay, Elise, go ahead. Sorry.
At what level of confidence are you that that Syria was responsible? I mean, there's having proof and believing that they did it, and then there's incontrovertible proof and a high level of confidence and assurance.
A very high level of confidence. Okay. Hi, Barbara.
Independently verify the intelligence coming in?
I'm not going to be able to give you information about the intelligence that we're gathering on that.
But you've got your own, you've independently verified that there is
The United States government has its own sources of information. We have been assessing this thoroughly since this took place on Saturday.
Heather, can you say, so we saw that President Erdogan of Turkey spoke to President Putin. He kind of seemed to suggest that there was some kind of discussions behind the scenes. Then we saw President Macron speak to President Putin. Are there discussions, like either directly or indirectly, with the Russians about next steps and what the U.S. is planning and deconfliction or anything?
I don't have any conversations on the part of the State Department to read out regarding Russia, so I'm not aware if we've had conversations with Russia at a high level. Perhaps we have at a lower level.
Even if it's not direct with the United States, but is it fair to assume that discussions are going on with the Russians about how the U.S. and its allies will have to respond to this? Because it definitely seems as if initially there was no conversations, and now there seem to be messages being passed back and forth.
Well, look, I think it's obvious that this is a messy region of the world. That country is very complex. There are lots of actors and things going on in it. We've had numerous conversations with the French, the British, the Saudis, the Israelis, and others. And so what information exactly is contained in those conversations, I'm not aware of. I know the White House had issued a readout. I don't happen to have that handy on the conversation between the British and also the U.S. and the French.
Talk about the involvement of Turkey, because it does seem as if President Erdogan spoke to Putin. He also spoke to Trump. He's talking about how the Russians feel about the United States. It definitely seems like there are messages being passed.
At least I don't have any information about any conversations that we may have had with the Turks. If the president had that conversation, I can look to see if there's a readout to provide it for you.
Can I clarify something?
Yeah.
You just said that the U.S. has very high level of confidence that the Syrian government was behind the chemical weapons attack. And I just want to is that according to U.S. intelligence?
I'm not going to comment on intelligence, but just U.S. government. Yeah. Hi, Gardner.
Hey.
Where you been?
Just wandering around.
Nice to have you back.
Yeah. So obviously we've been talking a lot about this sort of the tactical, what's going to go on in the immediate aftermath of this chemical weapons attack. Can you explain what the administration's Syria strategy is? Because there was Tillerson's speech, which said that we're going to have troops in Syria indefinitely. The president then said we're going to get out of Syria. Now you're talking about escalating in Syria. Are we going to be in Syria for a while? Are we escalating in Syria? What is our strategy?
Well, I think I'm not going to get ahead of the president. Certainly, I'll leave it to the president to announce what may or may not happen, what actions the U.S. government may or may not choose to take. I think it's clear that we are obviously engaged in Syria. One of the things that's important to us is try to encourage the parties to get back to the Geneva process. So when we look at pictures, for example, of the Turks and the Iranians and others meeting to discuss the future of Syria, some of those countries certainly don't have the best interest of Syria at heart. And that I'm specifically referring to the Russians and the Iranians and others. We would like to see us get back to the Geneva process so that there could eventually be a political solution in Syria.
Right, but that's not happening. So the secretary outlined a Syria
that's
strategy.
A goal. And frankly, that's a goal that Vladimir Putin had agreed to, but yet another example of the Russian government not living up to its agreements.
I understand. He gave that speech in Stanford, what was it, January 12th? Is that the Syria strategy? Is that still alive?
Well, Bernard, I think some of the things that will be happening as we have a new national security advisor who will be meeting with the president, presumably on this very important topic. We also will hopefully have a new Secretary of State coming in. So
it's all in flux.
So there could be some changes, but we as a government are going ahead and operating according to our pre-existing strategy and our pre-existing policies. And if things end up changing, that may be the case, and that's certainly the president's prerogative to change things.
So your position is that the United States has the best interests of Syria at heart, but no one else does?
I think calling for a return to the Geneva process, which is something that many countries have agreed to, has the interest of the Syrian people at heart, certainly.
Right, but the Russians and the Iranians have both
I don't think that the Russians and the Iranians have the best interests of the Syrian people at heart.
But they have called for a return to the Geneva process.
Well, they had called for that. But as we've talked about, Matt, I think your first question was about how Russia will try to turn facts on their heads. We see that happen all the time. So we don't think that they have the best interests.
You don't think that they really want to return to the Geneva process?
I do. They said they do.
Okay.
We're highly skeptical because we've not seen them go forward with that. Okay, Ilhan. Hi, Ilhan.
Hi, thanks so much. On that very meeting yesterday, Mr. Pompeo at the stated that meeting was basically those three countries were there in Ankara summit to carve up Syria. Is this the position of the United States government?
Is what the position of the United States?
Okay, folks, we are now taking you out live to Peru right now for the Latin Summit that Vice President Mike Pence is at right now. Let's listen.
Thank you all for being with us. I'm very honored to begin my visit to Peru, to this important summit with 4 courageous leaders of the Venezuelan opposition. And first, let me bring greetings from a great champion of the people and the liberty of Venezuela, President Donald Trump, who sent me here with a very simple message. It's a message the President has delivered to the Venezuelan people, to those leading the opposition in Venezuela, and I'll deliver again today, and that is that we're with you, and we're with you to see freedom once again prosper and thrive and to end the humanitarian crisis that is Venezuela today. The simple truth is that Nicolas Maduro has turned Venezuela democracy into dictatorship. And the leaders gathered around here know that, have lived that, and fought against that. His actions have resulted in a wave of corruption, crime, and abject misery of the people of Venezuela. Nearly 9 in 10 Venezuelans today live in poverty. Stores are empty, food is hard to find, major hospitals have only 5% of basic supplies. The Venezuelan people are literally, in many cases, starving. Many have died of starvation and deprivation. And millions have fled the oppression of the dictatorship in Venezuela. Some 2 million in number have left their country to seek refuge in neighboring lands and are continuing to flee in record numbers. By some estimates, nearly 5,000 people every day. As you all know, and we've spoken with several of you before, under President Trump's leadership, the United States has been enforcing strong sanctions and bringing economic and diplomatic pressure to bear on the Maduro regime, and we will continue to. We're providing a little more than $2 million in support for Venezuelans in Colombia. But today, with Mark Green of USAID, I'm very pleased to announce that the United States will devote an additional $16 million in the region to support Venezuelans who fled the tyranny and dictatorship and deprivation of that nation and are now in Colombia. In the course of this Summit of the Americas, I'll be calling on America's allies across the region to join us in this humanitarian effort. Because under President Donald Trump, we want one message to be clear. We are with the people of Venezuela. We oppose the tyranny, the repression, the dictatorship, the corruption. But we are with the people of Venezuela. And we'll continue to do everything in our power to provide sustenance and support to those who have fled this tyranny. The U.S. and our allies, I believe, are prepared to do much more than even that which we're announcing today to directly help the long-suffering Venezuelan people. Sadly, with regard to the people who are still in your native country, Nicolas Maduro stands in the way, refusing humanitarian aid to be delivered to Venezuela, and the world deserves to know that. In the course of this summit, we will speak about the importance of restoring democracy in Venezuela. We will speak about restoring basic human rights and basic freedoms and services. But we will also speak about the need for humanitarian aid to be allowed in to assist the families and communities that are suffering under the repression of this regime. I'm very honored to be joined not only by these opposition leaders in Venezuela, but by 2 important members of the President's diplomatic corps, and I want to recognize them before we hear from these leaders. The administrator of USAID, Mark Green, is with us, the agency that will administer these current and new funds for refugees who have fled from Venezuela, and also Paco Palmieri, the acting assistant secretary for Western Hemisphere at the Department of State. So before we hear from these courageous leaders, let me recognize my fellow Americans who are with us.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. You've said it very well, so I'll just add a few brief thoughts. To be clear, the humanitarian assistance that we are announcing today is not about politics. It is about helping the victims of a massive crisis. This aid is based upon need and need alone, because America will always stand with the hungry and the displaced. That's simply who we are as Americans. However, we cannot pretend that this situation falls into the same category as the natural disasters that we have seen over the last year, hurricanes and earthquakes. Let's be honest, in some ways this is more tragic because it is entirely man-made and regime-made. Now, we have all heard stories of the terrible suffering and the hunger among Venezuelans. What I think many people don't realize, especially those of us in the U.S., is that this crisis is also causing the largest displacement in Latin American history. Hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans are fleeing their homeland to escape the brutality and the corruption of the Maduro regime. 1.6 million, in fact. They're fleeing not only to their immediate neighbors, but to something like 20 other countries as well. Remember, Venezuela was once the wealthiest nation in South America. It has vast natural resources. It should be a donor nation, a regional leader, providing assistance to other less developed nations and less fortunate people. But instead of responding to suffering, it's driving it, causing widespread shortages of food, medicine, and fuel. The assistance that we are announcing today will help Venezuelans in Colombia and Brazil cope with hardship for things like potable water, shelter, and other supplies. As good neighbors and supporters of the Venezuelan people, we are glad to be able to help. But we all know that this action is merely a short-term response, not a solution. For the sake of the Venezuelan people and the entire region, we must hope that the Maduro regime releases its crushing grip and that we see a return to democracy and to rule of law. For the sake of the Venezuelan people who deserve a peaceful, hopeful future. With that, let me turn things over to our partner in this, Paco Palomari.
Thank you, Mark.
Paco?
Good job.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, and good afternoon, everyone. The Department of State is excited to be a part of the international support for Venezuelans who have fled to neighboring countries in search of safety, food, and the opportunity to live their lives in freedom. As Vice President Pence stated, the United States is providing nearly $16 million in additional humanitarian assistance to help meet the basic needs of these men and women who have lost everything to escape the Maduro regime. This funding supports the regional response by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, international organizations, and NGOs responding to the crisis. This funding will provide support for the most vulnerable, security from violence and exploitation, and work and education opportunities for Venezuelan people. We have been committed since the early stages of the crisis. Last year, UNHCR allocated more than $3 million provided by the United States to provide immediate humanitarian assistance. Recently, UNHCR issued a $46 million emergency appeal for Venezuela, covering 9 countries across the region. For example, with this U.S. funding, UNHCR will work with local governments to increase registration of Venezuelans and support their access to local services such as healthcare, education, food, and shelter. The United States is impressed by the generosity and compassion of those countries throughout the hemisphere who lead by example, hosting and providing humanitarian assistance to hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans. We also commend the humanitarian contributions from our partners in Asia and Europe and encourage additional contributions to meet growing humanitarian needs. Unfortunately, the Maduro regime continues to reject offers of international assistance. President Maduro should welcome this international aid, including food and medicine, and we call on him to do so immediately. The United States will continue to stand with the international community in support of the Venezuelan people and their right to have a voice in their government. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paco. Thank you, Mark Green. Let me recognize the great and courageous leaders who are here with us today, opposition leaders from Venezuela, beginning with Julio Borges, who's was president of the National Assembly, led the opposition during recent negotiations with the Maduro regime. Julio is on an extended tour of foreign capitals to promote the opposition's cause, sparking some rumors that he may seek asylum, which he strongly denies. His commitment is to Venezuela, and he's a man of great courage, and I'm honored to be with you.
Thank you, Vice President. Well, thank you, Vice President. Thank you, both of you. Thank you on behalf of Venezuelan people. We have been making a big tour around all over the world, explaining the situation of Venezuela. And the good news is there is a real awareness about the real situation of our fellow Venezuelan people. And it's very clear that the problem in Venezuela is not an ideological one. It's a problem of democracy versus dictatorship. And what we're asking to President of the region in this summit is to be stronger in the commitment for democracy in Venezuela, stronger in the commitment with political prisoners, stronger in the commitment for the humanitarian crisis that we are living, that there is no exaggeration, is the worst humanitarian crisis all over the region and probably in the history of Latin America. What we want is a prosperous Venezuela with future, with democracy, a united country, not a divided one. And we believe that we are near this change. And thank you for the international community for helping and being with us in this process. And we won't be and we won't allowed to have in Latin America a second Cuba, as is in the case of Venezuela, but a Cuba with oil, gas, and all the richness in the direction against democracy in Latin America. On the contrary, a democratic country open for the future of all over America as it has to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julio. Great honor to have you here. David Smolansky is a leader of the 2007 generation of student turned opposition mayors. He's the former mayor of El Hatillo. The pro-Maduro Supreme Court issued a warrant for your arrest last year, causing you to flee to Brazil. He now resides in Washington, D.C., but his heart is in Venezuela, and he's been a great and courageous champion for freedom in his native land. Thank you.
On behalf of millions of Venezuelans that are suffering, on behalf of our political prisoners and our exiles, this is a very important meeting for our country. Venezuela is suffering from the worst humanitarian crisis that we have ever had. It is a humanitarian crisis that could only be compared with countries that have suffered war with economic contraction of 40%. And Maduro's regime has become a threat to the region because the project of Maduro's regime is not only in Venezuela, he's also trying to reply that in other American countries. So I have just arrived from Cúcuta, which is the border of Venezuela. I was close, but at the same time, far from my country. I saw thousands of people fleeing that bridge from between Colombia and Venezuela every single second. Children with malnutrition, adults with no medicine, and people just escaping. So this support that you're giving to Venezuelans that are suffering in Colombia is very important to guarantee right to education, healthcare, shelter, It's something that we thanks for that, and we have to keep working to recover democracy, to recover freedom in Venezuela, because if we recover freedom and democracy in Venezuela, not only Venezuelans will be benefited, but also the whole region will be benefited. So thank you.
Well said. Well said, David. And let me recognize the former mayor of Caracas, Antonio Ledesma. He was arrested in 2015, placed under house arrest. He escaped in 2017, reaching Colombia and ultimately Spain. But he continues to be a strong voice for freedom and the restoration of democracy in Venezuela. And Mr. Mayor, thank you for being with us.
Muy amigo, muchas gracias a usted, señor vicepresidente, al presidente Trump, presidente Donald Trump, señor Palmieri, nuestro querido Juan Cruz, baño de lágrimas de los venezolanos, y a usted, señor Green, de verdad muchas gracias en nombre de esa gente que está pasando hambre. Usted ha asumido el caso de los venezolanos como si fueran sus hermanos, y eso lo agradecemos. Y quería hacer un complemento a lo que usted dijo sobre la dictadura. No es simplemente una dictadura. Venezuela padece los rigores de una narcodictadura. En Venezuela los venezolanos sufren el calvario de un Estado fallido. Yo diría que es tan grave la situación que si la Brigada Antinarcóticos de la DEA hace una redada en Venezuela, se trae medio gabinete, porque están involucrados con el narcotráfico y con el terrorismo. Y lo que pedimos, además de esta ayuda humanitaria, es una intervención humanitaria para Venezuela, porque nuestro país está secuestrado, nuestro pueblo está secuestrado, señor vicepresidente, secuestrado por mafias, por terroristas, por grupos parapoliciales, pero además Venezuela tiene un régimen que es un caso particular, porque es el único régimen en el mundo que paga para que un ejército extranjero nos invada, porque en Venezuela hay más de 30.000 efectivos cubanos entrometidos en la vida de nuestra nación. Por eso hablamos que una burla electoral solo servirá para que se perpetúe el tirano. En Venezuela nunca habrán elecciones libres mientras permanezca esta narcodictadura. Quiero pedirle en nombre del pueblo de Venezuela, por supuesto al señor presidente Donald Trump, que son necesarias las sanciones, ampliar las sanciones, intensificar las sanciones, que no son contra el pueblo, son contra las personas que han asaltado las instituciones públicas. En Venezuela no hay Estado de Derecho. En Venezuela no dependemos del imperio de la ley ni del Estado de Derecho, sino del estado de ánimo de un dictador que maneja a capricho no solo la suerte de Venezuela, sino que pone en riesgo la estabilidad política, la gobernabilidad de nuestro hemisferio. Es necesario que esas sanciones se amplíen hacia los testaferros, que se intensifiquen para incautar los bienes de los que tienen aviones, de los que tienen yates, de los que tienen mansiones, mientras el pueblo de Venezuela llora a niños que mueren por desnutrición. Por lo tanto, que quede claro que no estamos pidiendo sanciones contra la patria que queremos. Esta patria que represento en esta bandera que se le entrega, para que cuando usted esté en la Casa Blanca esté pendiente de Venezuela, esté pendiente de un país que sufre mucho. Y estoy seguro que los compañeros, como hemos hablado, están totalmente de acuerdo. Todos estamos totalmente de acuerdo en que se amplíen esas sanciones lo antes posible para liberar al pueblo de Venezuela. Muchísimas gracias por haberme escuchado.
Thank you. Well, lastly, let me recognize Carlos Vecchio, a top lieutenant of the opposition leader, Lopez, co-founder of the party, Voluntad Popular. After Lopez was imprisoned in 2014, Vecchio was indicted, went into exile in Florida. We have met on several occasions, and Carlos, I'm a great admirer of Mr. Lopez and you, and we appreciate you being with us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. On behalf of the Venezuelan people, I want to thank what you have done. Not only the U.S., but also I know that you have a connection with the Latin American countries and at the same time with the European Union. So that's very important, very remarkable what you have done for the Venezuelan people, particularly in favor of the people who are suffering at this moment in time. I would like, Vice President, to highlight the following. And in my view, it's important that the international community knows that we don't have a presidential election the next May 20th. What we have is a fraud. We have a coronation in Venezuela. And we don't have a fair and a transparent election. We don't have democratic election in Venezuela. And we don't have it because we don't have an independent electoral committee. Our political parties have been illegalized. The main candidates from the opposition are either in exile or in jail or have been politically disqualified, and we don't have a qualified international observer. So we ask you that the international community should not recognize the outcome of this election, and because of that, the opposition is not participating in this coming election. And for us, it will be very relevant to highlight that point during this American summit to transmit the international community that we don't have election that should not be recognized internationally. Thank you very much.
Before we go forward, I wanted to ask about Leopoldo Lopez and his wife Lillian. I know we spoke last year. How is he? How is he holding up? And how are they?
No, he's under house arrest. They are having a very difficult time as the rest of the Venezuelans. They have a lot of militaries surrounding his house, and they are putting pressure not only on Leopoldo but also against Lilian and the rest of his family. As you know, Lilian delivered her third daughter, so they are happy because of that, but at the same time they are suffering what the Venezuelan people are suffering. And I would like to highlight, Mr. President, Vice President, that Leopoldo is only one of the political prisoners, but we have thousands of political prisoners, and I want to talk, on behalf of them. So thank you for asking for Leopoldo.
Well, I hope you'll convey our regards and our prayers.
Thank you.
To him and his family, and our prayers to all of those that are imprisoned for their commitment to freedom and to the Venezuelan people. Well, let me again thank you. Thank you for your compelling stories. And the President and I thought it was altogether fitting to begin United States presence here at the Summit of the Americas here in Latin America, highlighting the plight of the Venezuelan people, and to have the opportunity to do that with these courageous leaders who have paid a price and who represent literally millions who continue to struggle under the weight of the dictatorship and the deprivation that is Venezuela today. Is something for which the President and I are both very grateful. So I'll end where I began. On behalf of President Trump and the American people, I hope our efforts today to continue to expand American aid is an encouragement. We'll be delivering a message to bring our allies together to confront this humanitarian crisis, but we'll also be bringing a message for additional sanctions, additional isolation, and additional diplomatic pressure beginning in our hemisphere but across the wider world to recognize that Venezuela is a dictatorship. Democracy has been denied. Basic services are being deprived in what was once one of the richest countries in South America. And we're going to remain committed to stand with you, to stand with the people of Venezuela until we achieve and restore democracy in this hemisphere of freedom. So thank you, and God bless you for your leadership. We're with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, so that was Vice President Mike Pence there in Peru for the Latin America summit. I'll take you back out now to Heather Nauer.
More people. Hi, Lori.
Hi, thank you. Iraq's foreign minister has spoken strongly against striking Syria. He said it would be a catastrophic defeat, put the countries of the world in jeopardy. Do you regard that as a statement of an ally? What's your response to it?
Well, Iraq has its own unique concerns. And it's certainly okay for them to be able to address their feelings about any actions the United States government and other governments may take.
So you think, well, okay, let me ask you another question which kind of relates to Iran as well, Iran and Iraq ties. The Iraqi press is reporting that popular mobilization forces are fighting, the hostile Shabi are fighting in Syria, and they're getting paid twice as much as a regular hostile Shabi. Do you think, what's your comment on that? Should they be fighting in Syria in the first place?
Certainly not. We are aware of those reports, though. Anyone that would leave Iraq and go to Syria to fight would certainly be, of those groups, would certainly be considered an undisciplined soldier or member of any kind of militia, and we would call on the forces, whatever forces, to remain engaged on the ground in Iraq and not go to Syria.
Is this an issue you're raising with the Iraqi government?
If we are, I'm not aware of that, but we've had conversations with the Iraqi government. Hi, Saeed.
Can I move to Gaza?
Sure.
No. Now, for the third Friday in a row, there's been this demonstrating, and then we have the violent quelling of these demonstrations or effort by the Israeli army. There's been like 3,000 casualties, maybe 35 dead. It's happening every day, and yet we have not heard anything from the State Department on this issue. How much longer will you remain silent on what is going on in Gaza?
I think answering your questions is hardly remaining silent. We've addressed this every time that I've been here at this podium since this started to occur.
Okay, so let me ask you this follow-up. Today, Secretary General of the United Nations, Guterres, said that he wanted to conduct a transparent and independent investigation of the use of excessive force by the Israelis. Would you support him in that effort?
I'm not familiar with his comments. I understand that the Israeli government, however, is conducting internal investigations.
So would that be sufficient?
I think that, Saeed, it's hard for me to comment on that because that would be an Israeli government matter, but my understanding is that they are conducting investigations.
Okay, my last question. Are you doing anything perhaps to sort of convince the Israelis or persuade them to use less force in quelling these demonstrations, because they are likely to go on day after day?
We have been watching these demonstrations, and whilst people certainly have a right to demonstrate peacefully, we've seen the images coming out of Gaza, and we have seen the flag burning. We have heard very heated rhetoric on the part of people there. We remain, as the U.S. government, convinced that the best way back to peace is through de-escalating tensions. We have asked those, and we continue to say, exercise restraint in your actions. We would like to be able to get both sides to a point where they can sit down and have conversations. Okay.
Have you gotten an answer yet to my questions from Tuesday about the journalist, the Palestinian journalist who was killed?
Well, I know we addressed some of your questions on Tuesday. I didn't realize there were any outstanding ones, but go ahead and ask them again.
Well, I mean, the Israeli's defense minister claims that he was a member of Hamas, a captain, and something which only the Israelis have said. The Palestinians, Hamas has denied, Palestinians have denied it, people who know him have denied it, the International Journalism Union says it's not true, Palestinian Journalism Union says it's not true. So, and your own U.S. Agency for International Development had vetted and approved him, or his company at least, which he owns, for funding. So what's going on here?
Yeah, Matt, I can tell you, and I think we had maybe addressed this on Tuesday, perhaps we did not. These are obviously very serious allegations. We are looking into those allegations very carefully. There are updates that when I have them, I will be happy to bring them to you. We have interagency colleagues who are taking a close look, both in the field, in Israel and in Washington, who are taking a look at this.
At what? At his death? Or at the allegations that he was a member of Hamas?
That's correct.
Well, that didn't answer the question. Which one?
The second matter.
So the U.S. government thinks that it is possible that this guy was actually not a journalist.
It's a serious allegation, and anytime an allegation of that sort is brought up, I think we look at it.
Well, the guy is dead.
Yeah, I think that would still be important for us to take a look at that. Okay, you're asking questions about it. Do you think it's important to look at it or not?
Well, I'm asking questions about it because nobody except for the Israelis and now apparently some part of the U.S. government that is not USAID, which had approved and vetted and approved this guy, say that he was a member of Hamas, but literally nobody else says that.
Matt, I can just tell you, I don't have any updates for you, but it is something that we are looking into.
So when journalists are imprisoned in Turkey, I'm going to ask you about the journalists that the president of Ecuador says were executed by Colombian rebels. You know about that?
I'm sorry.
You condemn, you condemn attacks against the,
Yeah.
you condemn attacks against the press
Yes, I do.
that are far less
Yes, I
than
do.
actual death. So I need to know what exactly is the position, what exactly the U.S. government position is on this, because if your friend and ally Israel did, for whatever reason, kill a working journalist, then it should be condemned, correct?
Matt, we are collecting information on the situation. We are assessing it very carefully. All of this is obviously a very serious situation. When I have an update for you, I would be happy to bring it to you.
But you would condemn a country, no matter what it is, no matter what country it is, killing a working journalist, would you not?
Matt, I will get back to you on this, okay? This is all. That's all I have for you today.
I don't care. I mean, look, if you want to have
Matt,
a policy,
it's obviously
if the
a
administration
complicated
wants to have
situation.
a policy
It's a
that,
complicated situation. We are looking into all of this to try to assess what the person was doing. You have your sources that have certain types of information. We are looking into it as well, okay? I'm not going to go beyond that. When I have more information that I can bring to you, I will certainly do that.
and just in terms of the general situation, you're calling for restraint on the part of the Palestinians or on the part of the Israelis?
I think it's fair to call for both sides to exercise restraint in this situation. I mean, we've seen it's gone on for, as Saeed pointed out correctly, almost 3 weeks now.
Okay, so you see the two sides as operating equally?
Matt, I'm not going to assign, an equal blame or anything to that. I'm just saying we would certainly call for those involved to exercise restraint.
Okay, it seems to be it's just a little bit problematic. I'm having a hard time understanding what your policy is towards Israel and the Palestinians. If it is, Israel can do no wrong and we will never criticize them, then, well, okay, that's the policy. But you should come out and say that's what the policy is. The middle ground that you seem to be trying to be taking, I don't get. So if an answer to that question would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Got it. Okay. Hi, Alicia.
North Korea has said that it supports a phased and synchronized approach to denuclearization. What is the U.S. view of how the process for denuclearization should take place?
Well, I think Director Pompeo spoke to that in the confirmation hearings, and that's been consistent with the U.S. government policy, and that is, we're not under any illusions that a comprehensive agreement on denuclearization could take place immediately in one sitting. We have remained consistent with our calls for the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. That is something that Kim Jong-un and his regime have told others that they are willing to commit to, and that's exactly why we're sitting down and talking together.
And in the confirmation hearing yesterday, Mr. Pompeo said that before we provide rewards, we get the outcome permanently, irreversibly. That is what we hope to achieve. Does that mean that the U.S. will not lift any sanctions until North Korea has transferred all nuclear materials?
We are going ahead with our maximum pressure policy. I'm not going to get ahead of any of those meetings, but I think we've made our position clear on the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, and that is the principle that we are working toward. Okay. Hi, Janet.
Thank you. North Korean Foreign Minister Lee Young-ho visited recently in Russia. And
he did what? He
visited Russia.
He visited Russia?
Yes.
Okay.
And then Russian government has recommended that U.S. and North Korea summit talks be held in Russia. Are you accepted it?
There are a lot of countries that would like for these talks to be held there. It would certainly be a boon to their economy and a real feather in their cap. But we've not decided where those meetings would take place yet.
So it is okay.
Okay.
Do you have anything on the veracity of media report that Washington is pondering to open a liaison office in Pyongyang?
No, I have nothing for you on that. Sorry, we have a lot of meetings and conversations that are taking place about what our summit would look like, but I don't have anything on that.
Are you denying the veracity of such report?
I've seen those reports. I highly doubt that that is something that we would do. Okay. Hey.
So yesterday, CIA Director Mike Pompeo said in his confirmation hearing that the goal of the U.S.-North Korea summit is to address the nuclear threat to the U.S., but he didn't say that they would discuss the threat to allies like South Korea and Japan. So will the U.S. discuss the threat from mid-range missiles at the summit?
I don't have a full readout of what exactly will be included or an itinerary of what will be included in that meeting, but one of the most important parts of our policy is to make sure that our allies are protected, our allies in Korea and Japan. As you all know, the President will be meeting with Prime Minister Abe next week at Mar-a-Lago. I think it's the 17th and 18th of this month. That's, of course, ahead of when the South Koreans will be meeting with North Korea the following week, I believe it is. And as you probably recall, John Bolton's counterparts were just here in Washington just yesterday and I believe the day before for their first meetings with John Bolton to discuss this meeting coming up ahead. So we are all on the same page with Japan and with the Koreans in terms of our continued commitment to our alliance with them. Okay. Sure.
There was sort of a suggestion in that hearing that Secretary Tillerson was responsible for the proposed budget cuts to the State Department. Obviously, that's an OMB decision. Does the Secretary-designate have any stance on the proposed budget, which would cut?
That is not a question that I have asked him. That is not. Okay. I think hopefully he will be confirmed quickly. Senator Corker said that he hoped to handle everything in an expeditious fashion. So hopefully we'll get a positive vote out of the committee and then out of the full floor and have him as the new Secretary of State, and then we'll let him decide what he wants to do with regard to talking to the White House, OMB, and others about the budget.
Okay, and then just another one from the hearing.
Sure.
On Iran, he mentioned that he had no evidence that Iran had been racing toward a nuclear weapon prior to the deal, and he didn't think that if the nuclear deal were abrogated, Iran would start racing for a nuclear weapon now. Is that the State Department's policy?
Look, I'm not going to be able to comment on everything he said at the hearing. He is the Secretary Designate at this point, not the Secretary of State. I don't want to be presumptuous and go around what the Senate is doing in terms of their confirmation process.
You just cited his testimony as part of administration policy.
Well, that was part of it, yes. That's fair. Okay. And I certainly did, but I'm not going to be able to parse out every single thing that he said. In terms of the JCPOA, I think the President has talked about his views on the overall JCPOA. As you know, and Nick, you and I had talked about this, the meeting of the E3 that took place here in Washington just a few days ago, in which our Director for Policy Planning, Brian Hook, was meeting with his counterparts to talk about what will happen next with the JCPOA. They met for a full day here and broke down those meetings and talking about different ICBMs and different parts of that meeting, and then also Iran's malign influence. So the President obviously has a big decision that he has to make coming up, and I'm not going to get ahead of that decision.
But just to clarify, I mean, speaking more broadly about the State Department's assessment of Iran's capabilities and its intentions, I mean, there was a great deal of urgency around the time that the nuclear deal was signed about breakout times and wanting to keep the breakout time as large as possible, things like that. Does the State Department, regardless of what the Secretary-designate said, share that assessment that it was not racing toward a bomb and would not?
That is not a question. That is not a question I've asked. If I can get an answer to you, I will certainly look into that and get it back to you.
On the hearing,
yes.
He also said that policy around Cuba might change dramatically. He said that he wanted to open up economic efforts in terms of selling, I think it was grain from Kansas to Cuba, and that he expressed an interest in increasing the diplomatic presence here. I'm just wondering if you, separate from what he said, have you all gotten the reassurances you need in Havana to start sending diplomats back to Cuba? And if not, what do you need? And given the government's transition next week, isn't this the kind of time when you want a fully staffed diplomatic presence there?
I think we fully want a fully staffed diplomatic presence here at the State Department. That we certainly do. Again, Director Pompeo is the head of the intelligence agency at this point. He is going through the confirmation process. Hopefully, he will become confirmed soon. If he becomes confirmed and he's the next Secretary of State, we will have lots of conversations with him about the direction. This is a question that I have not asked him. He's been in here in the State Department, spent a lot of hours here working on his confirmation preparations. I don't believe he would be so presumptuous as to state what he believes the policy should be going forward until and if he becomes the next Secretary of State.
Separate from what he has said, where are you on Cuba and sending and the investigation of that?
Our investigation is still ongoing.
Okay.
Okay. That investigation has not closed.
One other thing, he didn't sort of directly insult Secretary Tillerson, but throughout his testimony, he made clear that he believed that the State Department was in a bad place. Mm-hmm. Senators on the panel made clear that they thought the State Department was in a bad place. They talked about positions not being filled, mm-hmm. the place being shot full of holes. And one of the senators said that the place is in a blue funk. Mm-hmm. How do you agree with that assessment of where the State Department is at this point?
Look, I think
Secretary Tillerson?
I think I addressed that back in the fall and acknowledged that the State Department has had a morale issue. Of course, we would like to see more people in positions in the assistant secretary role and in the undersecretary role. Everybody wants to have a staffed up building. People are working hard. I mean, some people are doing 2 or 3 jobs, and people are very busy here. But that being said, we would still like to have more people in their positions. I think that we can look forward to, if Director Pompeo becomes the next Secretary of State, a more reinvigorated State Department. And I think I share my colleagues' assessment of that we look forward to him hopefully becoming the next Secretary of State.
Okay. Just for a moment. Some State Department employees, 32 of them have been sacked in Cambodia for sharing pornography. Can you give us an update on that?
I can only tell you that. Hold on a second. We can't comment on internal personnel matters. Sorry. Hey, Rich. Just a couple more and we got to go.
I'm looking into the administration saying that it now might re-engage on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Has something prompted that?
Not that I'm aware of. The president continues to assess various trade deals, bilateral deals and larger deals like the TPP, and tries to figure out the best way forward for the American people, for American companies. And I think the president just continues to look at those. I understand that our USTR, Lighthizer, is involved with this, as is Larry Kudlow. So they're taking a look at that. That's from my understanding. But I've not spoken with them personally about it.
Does the United States think it needs an economic counterbalance in the Asia-Pacific region to China's growing influence?
Well, certainly China does have a growing economic influence. That is certainly the case. And I imagine this will be one of the conversations that will come up between the president and Prime Minister Abe when they meet next week.
Sorry.
I keep promising I'll go to March.
Okay, thank you, Heather. It's about energy and Russia and Nord Stream 2. A few weeks ago, you said that the United States government opposes this project.
Yes,
but if I recall, the Russian companies that were involved or are involved in the project were not targeted by the recent wave of sanctions. So is this project going to become a target of sanctions?
So I can tell you with our sanctions activity, specifically CATSA, for example, January 29th, you may recall, gosh, it seems like forever ago. I guess it wasn't that long ago. That under CATSA, January 29th was the first day that we could begin imposing sanctions. We've been communicating with other countries, companies and the sort about what CATSA looks like and what the guidelines are for CATSA. I'd like to note for you something that Angela Merkel said earlier this week, which is in the agreement with the United States, and that is Nord Stream 2 and how we are both share very grave concerns about how Russia can easily use Nord Stream 2 as a political weapon against other countries. Countries in Eastern Europe, Ukraine, for example, is certainly one of them. Poland and others are other examples of that. that. So I think we're in a pretty good agreement with Angela Merkel on that as we continue to oppose Nord Stream 2. In terms of sanctions for those companies, bless you, I think we've been clear with the companies that work in that realm, that those who work in Russian energy export pipeline business, that they're engaging in a line of work that could subject them to sanctions. We have addressed this many times here that we won't preview our sanctions activity, but those companies and those entities that have been involved in that sector of the business have been made aware that they are exposing themselves to the risk of sanctions.
Is there any hope on your side that they will delay, stop this project?
I'm not sure of that, but we certainly oppose it.
Okay. You were asked about Pakistan, if there's any travel restriction on Pakistani and Indian diplomats traveling in the United States. So I would like to know if there is any discussion for the United States to impose a travel restriction on diplomats.
Yeah, I have nothing for you to announce. Nothing to announce. Okay. And last question, we got to go.
It's just about the JCPOA. I just want to clarify that what you were saying is that we are just waiting for president's decision next month, and before that, there won't be any updated or fixed version for the deal.
Well, we had no. I did not say that. I said I'm not going to get ahead of the president's final decision that he does make. However, we just had a meeting here in Washington earlier this week where our policy planning director Brian Hook was talking with his counterparts from the E3 about strengthening some provisions within the JCPOA. We're having conversations about that. We're making some progress on some fronts. We also had conversations about our agreements about we've seen almost activity around the world. And so there may be some decisions that could come out ahead of the JCPOA. Okay.
So do you expect that you just contact Iran before the next deadline? Or?
I have nothing for you on that. Okay, we got to go. Everybody have a terrific weekend. We'll see you next week.
All right, folks, and welcome to the Fox 10 News Now stream, part of Fox10Phoenix.com. We didn't get to show you in full of the Mega Millions jackpot winner announcement. We'll show that to you here on News Now.
Hey, Mark. Mr. Richard Wall. Richard? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. So the only thing I'm going to ask is my family, I won't discuss today. That's off limits, but everything else I'll talk about. I am from Vernon, Michigan. I moved here at the end of July for a job opportunity. Really great company, did me well. The story of how I won, it's a little amusing. I don't play Mega Millions. Twice I played. I played on Tuesday. I was sitting with a guy from work, eating, talking about retirement, saying, hey, if we win, we can retire. Going through all the wish lists, the stories, all that stuff. And he says, I drive past that sign every single day coming to work, and I don't ever buy. So on Monday, I decided to stop and buy a ticket. I looked on Tuesday. I didn't win. The next morning I looked. I didn't win. My wife looked at me and said, why buy? It's God's fate. He's going to make his decision. It's his plan what's going to happen. So on Thursday, I stopped in to the gas station to get gas. Decided to go in. I had $20 left in my pocket. I said, I'm going to go in, buy some tickets. I actually had $22 and went and bought a Diet Coke. So got home, Good Friday, I'm checking the numbers at 8 o'clock. Me, I've never played before. Lottery for me is always 7:30. I didn't know they draw at 11 o'clock. So I'm checking at 8 o'clock. Go back, do some stuff, sitting upstairs with my wife around midnight. She tells me she's got to fold some laundry. I said, I'm going to go downstairs, check my numbers. If I win, you're going to hear a huge scream. We're leaving on vacation. We're going to retire. So I go downstairs, I look at my numbers. First thing I look for is the Mega number 1, the gold number. I look for it. I only find one of them down below. read it across. I said, oh, 1. There's no 11. I said, well, I guess I'm not the winner. So I go up a little bit higher. I say, oh, here's an 11. And I go 11. And I see 28, and I'm excited. I'm on $4. I'm delighted right now. I see the next number 31. I'm like, all right, this is going to be a good day for me. And I see the next number 46. And then I see 59. And I'm like, wow, I won $1 million. Remember, I looked earlier for the 1. I didn't see it. I'm like, I won $1 million. I can't believe it. I was excited. Life-changing money. I went over and looked at that 1. I could tell you it didn't sink in. It was truly amazing. Both some of my family members were sleeping, so I didn't go and scream out. I walked upstairs. I tell my wife, I saw her, I said, baby, we get to go on vacation. She goes, what are you talking about? Don't be an idiot. I'm like, no, seriously, we hit it. We won the lottery. So I showed her the numbers. We looked at them probably 15 times. So then I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, man, I didn't play the Megaplier. Do I have to have that to win? I don't know. I've never really played the game. I'm trying to Google. I'm looking at everything. So then I finally realized, that I don't have to have that. And I'm like, wow. So then we're driving around on Saturday, and when they announced there was one winner, that was something else. So for us, we believe God has a plan. So for us, the plan is to do a lot of good things with it. We'll be working with our financial team to make sure those things happen. It's not only life-changing money for me, but I want it to be life-changing money for others. Family, friends, people in need. So we're going to try to do some good things with it.
Vernon, New Jersey or Michigan?
New Jersey.
Who else did you call when it happened?
Nobody. I didn't leave the house all weekend. I didn't even get a chance to go to church, and that was big for us to go to church on Sunday. For us, it was, we were going to go Easter egg hunting on Saturday morning. Decided not to go. Sunday, didn't go to church. I didn't feel comfortable taking the ticket out of the house. I didn't feel comfortable leaving it in the house. Fire, somebody come in, be crazy, take it. I don't know. Like I said, it's life-changing. We gave up our weekend, and, actually, a lot of you guys probably seen me already. The day they were handing out the $30,000 check, I actually stopped in for gas. I didn't see the news cameras. So I told my wife, we're not from New Jersey a lot, so we don't drive around a lot. I didn't know if I needed toll money. So I'm looking at my wallet. I gave the guy that pumped my gas the last of my money. I'm like, I got a little more money. I got to go in and get some money out of the ATM. So she's like, no, let's go to a different store. They're gonna recognize you. They're trying to figure out who it is. We don't want them to see you. I'm like, nah, we'll be okay. So I went in there, and I seen all the cameras. I'm like, oh man, this is not going to be good. So I turned to the left and I asked the clerk, who actually is the one that sold it to me. I asked him, I said, where's the ATM? And he gave me a double look like he knew me. I'm like, okay, this is not going to be good. And then he finally looked at me and said, the ATM's behind. And I turned around and said, nah, too many cameras. I'm out of here. And I took off and I came right here. So some of you were there probably. So you would have actually seen me in there.
Is there something that you said you won't talk about? Do you have kids?
I won't talk about my family.
So is there something about this that's going to change people who are close to you for the better that you've been wanting to change but couldn't yet, and this money will help you do that?
I'll say that it'll help a lot of my family and friends that maybe struggle every single day. Like every other American, they're out there, living check by check, some of them. Fortunately for me, I didn't have to live like that. I actually had a really good job, but there's some of my family that can't live like that. So it's good for me to be able to give back to them, especially like my mother. She's a senior, living on a reduced income, so I'll be able to help her out and do some things for her and be able to help out my family.
How does that feel, being able to pick up the phone and let your mom know that you didn't take care of her?
Humbling. I keep using that word, humbling. We're just humbled by the fact of everything that's happened. Some might say it's shock. We're not the type that's going to run out and spend all the money and have this great time and party it up. That's not us. We're humbled. We're a humble family. We're going to keep our roots, help out as much as we can, and do some good things with it, and leave it up to our financial advisors to help us where we need to go.
What did you do?
No. Actually, the weird thing is my mom actually called me before I wanted to tell her and told me, I heard somebody in New Jersey won the lottery. Was it you? And wasn't ready to share with her yet, so I told her, absolutely not, Mother. Not me. You know, if it was me, I'd be jumping around for joy. So, no. I told her after the fact, after we turned the lottery ticket, and we wanted to make sure everything was finalized and everything before I went and started telling a lot of people. We wanted to, bring it in here. Even when I brought it in, turned the ticket in, it's every day to them. I looked, I said, so did I win? And she goes, oh, yeah, you won. So thank God. I still wasn't sure.
What's your occupation, and will you be keeping your job?
I'm helping my job right now through the transition. I won't be staying there working. I'm going to take this time to spend time with my family. I work a lot of hours. I go into work real early and leave and get home real late at night. We choose to live up north of Vernon, but I actually work in Hillside. They actually told me I could talk about their name, so I work at AAK Food Service. I'm a production manager out there. I run their facility.
Who else knew after you found out? Who did you let in on the secret?
Going through it, I talked to the executives at my work because I want them to be aware. I don't want them being surprised. Again, for me, it's more important, I was helping build a company there, and it's more important for me to make sure they're taken care of. I don't want to leave them shorthanded, and I don't want to just leave them in a spot. And then family, some friends, some really close friends of ours knew, but that's about it.
You think you'll stay in the area, or are you going to?
We haven't made a determination what we're going to do yet.
Is there something that you've been wanting to buy that now you can buy that you're going to buy?
Well, of course. Everybody's got something they want to buy.
What is it? What's your something?
So my dream is always I wanted to rebuild a 1963 Corvette. Whether I get the chance to do it or not, I don't know. But that's been my dream, so we'll see if I live out that dream.
Where did you keep the ticket? You said you were scared of a fire or bringing it outside?
In a safe. A fireproof safe to make sure, I would have to say I checked that number at least 15 times throughout the weekend because I didn't believe it. I thought maybe they're going to magically disappear or change on me.
You hear stories about lottery winners who, once it's revealed they are the winner, there's every 10th cousin calls hoping for some help, and a lot of people. Are you concerned that there'll be a pressure on you now from a lot of people who you may not know that well, who will want something from you, and are you prepared to deal with that?
I am prepared to deal with it, and no, I'm not concerned. I know how to say no. Not in a bad way. Just because somebody knew me 10 years ago and want to come up, no. Our goal is to do a lot of charity work and do good things for people that need it. Just because I knew you or you were a 10th cousin down the line way back when doesn't mean that I'm going to help them, or I might. We haven't completely decided. We're going to leave it up to our financial team to help us go through this. But again, it's more important for us to help people as much as possible.
Do people in your church community now?
No, we actually don't have a church here yet. We're Catholic, so we were going to the Catholic church. We haven't joined it. We haven't lived here long enough to really sit down and put roots in. Where I'm from before, they'll know it as soon as they see this press release, and I'm sure they'll be reaching out to talk to me and stuff like that.
And where are you guys going on vacation?
I won't disclose that. I'm sorry, guys. This is all about my family's safety, first and foremost, right now.
Did you pick?
Since July, I think I moved here July 28th.
Did you pick the numbers, or were they auto?
They are easy pick. That's why we believe it's God's plan. He chose the numbers for us. He's the one that made the decision. I was listening to a broadcast of some guys talking on the thing, and the one guy said, but everyone hits the button and tickets are sold like this. If that guy would have been 1 second later, it would have went to somebody else. So for us, we ultimately believe God made the decision that he's the one that put it in his hands and pushed the button, and he's the one that made the decision for us to be able to do this. And my wife's always talked about that she wants to help out as much as possible. She's actually from Mexico, so we really, I get emotional. We really want to help out some of her people that she's known way back when, her family that's still back in Mexico, and there's going to be a lot of things that we want to do, both here in the United States and abroad.
So you're saying we're not siblings anymore?
Did you buy your wife a gift or anything like that to celebrate? Or?
No, my wife's more humbled like I am. She doesn't want anything. Will I do something nice for her? Of course. She's my wife. She's my queen. I will make sure she's taken care of. So.
The New Jersey Lottery Commission is one that's obviously your name goes to public record, but I don't think you had to do this
like, what makes you decide to let everybody know who you are yourself?
No, they have to do this. This is a requirement. Because I wouldn't be standing up here. First and foremost, my family's safety is more important, and we didn't want my face to be out there. That's why my wife's not here with me. We don't want my wife's face out there. You know, we do have others we have to worry about, so we just want to make sure that their safety is our first priority. As you said, people will be coming out of the woodwork. We want to make sure that they don't bother the rest of my family.
You mentioned where you worked in a city back there. I wasn't able to hear that. Can you just say one more time? I'm sorry.
AAK Food Service.
And you do?
I am a production manager out there. Yes, sir.
Were you afraid to let go of that ticket? You know, like when handing it into the person here, you know, it's in your hands.
Oh, no, I couldn't hand it to the person here fast enough. But anybody else, yes. I was not. No one else is going to get the ticket.
You mentioned Mexico. Is your wife?
She is.
Which part?
I won't go into details about that either.
The owner of the Luke Oil promised to keep trying to do his secret. Are you grateful for him? He was really, really like adamant about not telling anybody he thought he knew it was you. So what do you have to say to him?
So that's a hard one, because if they would have known who I was when I walked in there to your guys' press conference for the $30,000, they would have mentioned it then. No one knew who I was. I'm not a regular at the store like that's been called for. I do stop in there for gas. It's one of the places I do go for gas. I go there, and then a store that has Acme. Got to save that 10 cents each time, you know. And then that's about the only times I ever stop in there. So I'm not a regular. I just stop in for gas, and me to go in the store, I think I've been in that store maybe 4 or 5 times since I moved here.
What did you do that night when you told your wife when you were able to sleep?
We cried a lot together as a family, hugged a lot. I don't sleep much as it is, but no, we didn't sleep that much. The nerves, the shock of everything. It really hasn't. I don't think it's still settled in with us. Thinking about how much money it is. Like I said, it's life changing.
How old are you? And you said you lived in Michigan before. Did you live only in Michigan before? Or were you...
No, I didn't mention I lived in Michigan before. And I'm 47. Did I? Yeah. Man, I slipped up. When did I say that? Yes, I lived in Michigan before. Yes, we explored. I called multiple lawyers to see if we could, and I was told at each time that you're not allowed to do that in New Jersey.
You said 47, right?
I am 47.
When's your birthday?
I won't give that information.
When you went in there with $20, how many tickets?
That is 10 easy picks.
Can you still believe it?
Actually, when I went down to look at my numbers, I know it's weird, and that's why I say we do believe it's God's plan. I actually had something come over me that told me I was going to win. And I'm not saying that to be cocky. I actually felt that. But I guess everyone feels that when they go down and look at their numbers. So it just happened. I was, I would say lucky, but we don't believe, my wife and I don't believe in luck.
Are you doing the cash option?
We are doing the cash option.
Are you going to continue playing?
Probably. Probably. I've played a couple times since then. Honestly, I don't know. Probably right now. Maybe I'll stop later on. Again, it's God's decision who He wants to have the big numbers too, and it's His plan.
Tuesday's tax day, where you get all your personal finances together like everybody else. Now all of a sudden you got this monkey wrench in your equation.
I don't worry about that. That's up to my financial team.
I don't mean about this money. I mean about your personal, like where you struggle to kind of, put your personal finances together, and then all of a sudden.
Yeah, I do my taxes early. I'm one of the first ones out the gate. As soon as the W-2s, I send my taxes in. I don't like to have to deal with that. Give him his money and be done with that.
What are you doing tonight?
I'm on a plane.
Speaking of which, he has a tight schedule here, so maybe just a couple more, and then we can wrap it up. I'll be happy to answer any questions afterwards as well regarding the ticket or anything else.
What's the first big chunk of money you plan on spending besides vacation?
Honestly, I don't know. I really haven't thought about it. We're going to be looking at a lot of different things, but I have to meet with my financial team, and they're going to have to walk me through everything because truly I don't understand all of it. That's why they're paid, to come in and help us and do what they need to do.
Well, you mentioned your mother earlier, and you said she's a senior citizen. Can you just tell us in the room, like, her circumstances and how you might be able to help her out in her age, like what you want to do for her?
No, I'm just going to tell you that she'll be taken care of. She won't have to worry about money the rest of her life, but other than that, I won't mention it anymore.
Are you grateful that Trump was elected so that you can benefit from tax?
I don't even think politics. I don't even deal with politics.
Well, let's take a picture of you me handing you the check, Richard, and
okay.
then we'll step in front of the podium. Oh, here? Yeah. Richard, congratulations once again. You are, as I said earlier in my comments, you are the largest winner of the New Jersey lottery in our nearly 50-year history. Thank you very much. Thank you.
What a spectacular win that was there. All right, we're going to show you the White House right here while we get our next video queued up here. We're going to be showing you Stormy Daniels, lawyer who was speaking earlier today outside of a New York federal courthouse.
I'm prepared to take questions from the press.
What's your interest in this case? Why are you here?
Well, my client's documents are some of the documents that were seized in connection with the search warrants, number one. And number two, we're here to ensure that this process is as public and as open as possible. Justice Louis Brandeis said that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and that's what this case, or at least our case, is about. And we're here to ensure that the American people have as much access to documents and information concerning this critical investigation as possible. We're also here to support the efforts of the U.S. Attorney's Office from the Southern District of New York to ensure that this privilege review is conducted in a fair and equitable manner that above all else maintains integrity of these documents.
What did you think of the fact that Mr. Trump has another lawyer representing him because his lawyer is being represented by lawyers in this case?
Well, it's our view that at the very moment that those raids were conducted on Monday, that an unwaivable or non-waivable conflict of interest occurred between Mr. Cohen and Mr. Trump that required that he get new counsel. So I'm not surprised by that. What I'm surprised at is that it appears to have taken him 2 or 2.5 days to get new counsel in place. In my view, he should have had new counsel by the close of business Monday. It's rather shocking to me that the President of the United States is not able to obtain competent legal counsel for some 48 hours after his attorney's offices are raided. That's rather shocking to me.
Have you met with prosecutors in the criminal matter?
I'm not going to get into whether we've met with them or communicated with them. What I will say is that we are fully cooperating with the U.S. attorneys from the Southern District of New York.
Is there anything in the files that you, on behalf of Stormy Daniels, are going to invoke a privacy claim about, or are you comfortable with anything concerning her becoming available to investigators and to the public?
We don't know the full scope of everything that was seized. We are not privy to that information, but as a general proposition, we believe as much information about this process should be made public as possible. This is a critical case, quite honestly, in modern times relating to the access of the people and the access of the press, and we're going to fight on behalf of the public and the press for that access.
How far have you gotten in terms of identifying the person who threatened your client?
I think we've made considerable progress. We're not entirely there yet. We hope to potentially have that identification within the coming days.
And do you think that's potentially part of the criminal probe?
I'm not going to speculate as to whether that's part of the criminal probe or not. What I will say is that the Southern District of New York, the U.S. Attorney's Office, is one of the finest offices in the nation. They're very aggressive, very competent, and I'm confident that at the end of the day, they're going to get to the bottom of any criminal conduct or activity that occurred in connection with this.
Are you aware of what was in this search warrant and what was seized?
I'm not going to answer that question.
What does it say to you that the president's lawyer is here saying he has acute interest in this case? What message does that send?
Well, I think there's no doubt that he has an acute interest. Clearly, Michael Cohen was his longtime attorney and effectively probably knows where all the bodies are buried, as they say. And I think that in the event that Michael Cohen is ultimately charged, that could pose significant and very, very serious problems for the President of the United States. Anything else?
What do you think of the Inquirer potentially paying off the doorman? Is this a pattern of behavior?
I don't know a lot about that case. I don't know whether the doorman's claims are accurate or not. I've seen conflicting reports, so I'm not in a position to opine as to the veracity of those statements or not.
And Michael, do you have a preference between the special master or the taint team to review the materials?
Well, I don't necessarily have a preference between the taint team and the special master, but under no circumstances do I think that Michael Cohen's attorneys should be the one conducting the review relating to privilege. Above all else, we want to make sure that the integrity of the documents that were seized is maintained. We don't want documents disappearing or being destroyed under any circumstances. So whatever relief is fashioned, we want to make sure that process or that concept or principle is respected.
So your main objection is to Cohen's lawyers participating in the process?
Yeah, we don't believe that's appropriate under any circumstances. And I also want to stress this. While it is somewhat unusual for an attorney's offices or a home to be raided by the FBI, it's not unheard of in the United States. Attorneys are prosecuted on a somewhat regular basis, just like any other citizens. While they're entitled to certain protections, they're not entitled to absolute protection. The President of the United States is no different than any other American citizen as it relates to his privilege. He should have no greater rights or no less rights.
Do you believe that your client's conversations with Mr. Cohen or her representative at the time were recorded by him?
We don't know, but I will say this. If that Washington Post story is accurate, that Michael Cohen actually recorded these communications, played them for others, and then saved them only to have them ultimately obtained by the FBI, then Michael Cohen is far less intelligent than I thought he was, and I never thought he was that intelligent. All right, that's it. Well, I think there's no question that there's documentation in those records concerning the negotiation with my client, perhaps communications with the president relating to the payoff. There could be a whole host of documents relating to that agreement, the payment, what the president knew, and when he knew it. And we're going to hopefully find out exactly what's in the documents. Thank you.
Michael,
Thank you.
Was any of that in your mind?
Yeah, right.
Well, I think it certainly has the ability to be criminal, depending on what was shared with the president and what he knew and when he knew it, and of course the circumstances around that $130,000 payment. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary General, I started to listen to my Russian friend and respond, but instead I'm in awe, Vasily, of how you say what you say with a straight face. I really, really am. Today's session of the Security Council has been called under truly strange circumstances. The Russian Federation has asked us to discuss what it calls unilateral threats related to Syria. What is strange is that Russia is ignoring the real threat to international peace and security that has brought us all here. And it is ignoring its own unilateral responsibility for all of it. What we should discuss today is the use of deadly chemical weapons to murder innocent Syrian civilians. That is one of the most blatant and grotesque violations of international law in the world today. It is a violation of all standards of morality. It violates the long-standing international consensus that chemical weapons represent a unique evil. Chlorine, mustard gas, and other chemical weapons killed 90,000 people and injured over 1 million in World War I. In the book, Canada in the Great World War, the Canadian soldier, A.T. Hunter, described it like this, quote, "The gas cloud gathered itself like a wave and ponderously lapped over into the trenches. Then passive curiosity turned to active torment, a burning sensation in the head, red-hot needles in the lungs, the throat seized by a strangler. Many fell and died on the spot. The others, gasping, stumbling, with faces contorted, hands wildly gesticulating and uttering hoarse cries of pain, fled madly through the villages and farms and through the city itself, carrying panic to the remnants of the civilian population and filling the roads with fugitives of both sexes and all ages." End quote. Chemical weapons didn't produce the most casualties in World War I, but they were the most feared. In World War II, chemical weapons were employed on an industrial scale against civilians, resulting in the worst genocide in human history, which we recalled just yesterday on Holocaust Remembrance Day. That is what brings us here today. That is what chemical weapons are all about. That is why we must not stay silent in the face of horrible chemical weapons use in our own time. The first response to all this death and injury was the 1925 Geneva Protocol, which banned the use of chemical weapons in war. Later, in 1993, the Chemical Weapons Convention was signed. That convention obligates all of its parties to, quote, "never under any circumstances develop, produce, stockpile, transfer, or use chemical weapons." It also prohibits all parties from assisting anyone to engage in these activities. The United States is a party to this convention. Russia is a party to this convention. Every country that is a member of the United Nations Security Council is a party to this convention. Even the Assad regime has pledged to abide by the convention. So in theory, all of us agree on the core principle at stake today. No country can be allowed to use chemical weapons with impunity. Now that we have established what we all agree on, let's ask ourselves, what should we be condemning today? We should be discussing the actions that really brought us to this moment in time. We should not be condemning the country or group of countries that might actually have the courage to stand up in defense of our common principle, the principle against the use of chemical weapons. Instead, we should be condemning the country that unilaterally has stopped the Security Council from upholding this principle. Who is it on the Council that most exhibits unilateralism when it comes to chemical weapons? It is Russia alone that has stopped at nothing to defend the Syrian regime's multiple uses of chemical weapons. It is Russia alone that killed the Joint Investigative Mechanism, which allowed the world to ensure accountability for chemical weapons use in Syria. It is Russia alone that used its veto 6 times to prevent the condemnation of Assad's use of chemical weapons. It is Russia alone that used its veto 12 times to protect the Assad regime. And to make matters worse, it is Russia alone that had agreed to be the guarantor of the removal of all chemical weapons in Syria. If Russia had lived up to its commitment, there would be no chemical weapons in Syria, and we would not be here today. That is the Russian record of unilateralism. It is a record that has led to the trashing of all international standards against the use of chemical weapons. This meeting should not be about the so-called unilateral threats. It should be about the multiple actions Russia has taken to bring us to this point. Our president has not yet made a decision about possible actions in Syria. But should the United States and our allies decide to act in Syria, it will be in defense of a principle on which we all agree. It will be in defense of a bedrock international norm that benefits all nations. Let's be clear. Assad's most recent use of poison gas against the people of Douma was not his first, second, third, or even 49th use of chemical weapons. The United States estimates that Assad has used chemical weapons in the Syrian war at least 50 times. Public estimates are as high as 200.
Well, folks, and that's going to do it for us here today on the News Now, also for the weekend as well. We do appreciate everybody joining us here, and we will see you again on Monday. I'll be here all next week here for you guys. Take care.